And who are you?
I'm Levy.
You've been on Channel 9 what, twice before? You're
Yeah, it was on the first day.
Are you an attention hog?
Yeah, I like the camera.
I can't get Bomber, but I keep getting you.
I love talking to developers.
And what are we?
So I'm the.
You invited me over here to see something we've seen on Channel 9 before, but now the Whidbey team is in the final throes of shipping Beta 2, right? I just heard on the.
That's right. And today's April 13th as it's recording, and so I'm thinking by the time people see this video, that they will, have access to the Beta 2 of Visual Studio 2005.
Excellent.
And that's basically what we're going to spend time showing here right now.
All right. So how many features did you sneak in at the last minute?
Actually, what we've been doing is pretty well locked down on what we're doing in the area of XML Tools. And what you'll find is this area of Whidbey Beta 2 is rock solid. Like there isn't anything missing or not functional. People could just use the XML tools that I'm going to show you just daily. Okay. It works great. There's people inside Microsoft using it every day as well.
And
so I was going to say I'm the Visual Studio Data Product Manager, and so
And you're the FoxPro guy too.
Yeah, FoxPro Product Manager, but I spend some time sponsoring the XML tools that are going in Whidbey, and
in other words, this is your night and weekend job, right?
Definitely, yeah. And every developer, whether they're C#, VB, FoxPro, ASP.NET, doesn't matter. A lot of them touch XML, so this is like the tools for everyone.
A lot of people are excited about what you've done for Visual Studio. So you have a new demo, right?
Well, it's a new demo, and it's also you were talking. I got a tablet PC. I'm just getting up on it about a month now. It's a Toshiba M200, and it's got, because people like to know the speed, 2 gig speed and 1 gig RAM, and I am running virtual PC here, allocated 512 K RAM. So when you see Visual Studio 2005 Beta 2 running here, it's going to be under virtual PC with only 512K. And you'll see here, I'll just start it up. It comes up pretty fast.
Damn. Do that again.
I'll just close here. Remember, this won't forget, virtual PC is running, only 512 allocated. And then I'm going to open that project there, and you'll see little things, probably a little sluggish because of virtual PC, but I mean, I like virtual PC, especially for running beta stuff or doing demos and things that you can package up. It's like carrying around a bunch of computers, as long as you have the disk space.
So how's Whidbey looking?
Great. Yeah, I mean, there's only certain areas for me that I spend on it, so I'm not the person asked to know the whole aspect, but a lot of people are excited about it, and I believe that in Beta 2, people can actually deploy apps. That's why they're taking their time to make sure it's very solid for people to actually build apps and deploy like websites with ASP.NET and everything.
Yep, we saw that with Scott Guthrie.
Yeah.
So what about XML?
So
what's the state of the art of XML?
Codename Everett. That's Visual Studio 2003, shipping today. A lot of people use.
Yep.
There is an XML editor, and the thing is that the goal wasn't to make it a full-blown XML editor. Really, what it is a way to open up XML files and edit them with some color and minimal IntelliSense, and it really doesn't go near far enough for people to do XML editing on a regular basis. When you apply a schema, it doesn't fully validate, it's not very extensible, and there's nothing to do with XSLT, which a lot of people use. So we looked for Visual Studio 2005 to build from the ground up a great world-class XML editor with a lot of features that take advantage of the whole Visual Studio shell. And actually, everything you're going to see feature-wise in the XML editor, it's actually all written in managed code. It's a whole component of Visual Studio 2005. It's no COM. It's all managed components, and it's very fast.
Cool.
So
show it.
Okay.
Let's see it.
So what I have is a little project here. I'm not going to show every file in here. You'll see me bounce around in this little project. All right.
Okay.
And the nice thing is that XML files can be in any project type, ASP.NET, C#, VB.NET. It doesn't matter. You just add your XML files to your project. And actual Visual Studio 2005 has a way of what we call sniffing the file. So even if the extension is not XML, when you open it, it'll take a look at the header, see if it's XML, and then automatically open the XML editor if it's not registered to any other file type.
Okay.
So one of the first files I'm going to show is this thing called syntax XML. And when we talk about validating XML, there's really two areas. There's the core rules, W3C XML 1.0, and that's the rules of XML. Like if you don't have even the intro processing instruction here, or you don't have a proper root or end tag, then it's not technically XML. You have to follow the basic rules.
Right.
Then there's a level of, oh, I have a schema and I'm validating against it, but that's not even the same as just the pure rules. So if you were to open this file, I'm going to copy and paste this and open it in Notepad. Now, I know you're not a person that spends all evening playing with XML files raw, but a lot of people will look at that and immediately know that's XML, but they wouldn't be able to tell me the whole series of errors that exist in this file. And even if you're using Visual Studio .NET 2003, you wouldn't know. It doesn't tell you what the problems are.
Right.
We did is treated XML like a language. XML stands for Extensible Markup Language.
Maybe Tim Bray would be able to see the errors.
Oh, of course. Yeah, exactly. And So what happens is what you can do is see here in the errors and warnings, actual errors, and now you can like double click and let's say ABC not defined. I double click here and see you can't have just an entity sitting there. And if I remove that text, then it'll automatically remove that error. See here?
Yep.
And you double click here, like there's certain things you have to,
So when you double click,
encode
it actually takes your cursor and puts it
exactly,
on
just like a line of code
right there.
in VB that was an error, right?
Yeah.
See, here's a great one. Attributes cannot start with a number, just like common variables in a lot of languages.
Right.
So I'll just put the letter A there, and it'll automatically get rid of the red squiggly line, and then it will remove the error from the list. So this is just your general experience of working with XML
Right.
in the editor. So let me take you to a tour when we come up to Tools here, and I'll go into Options dialog. And I want you to understand that we have, let me see here, fonts, projects, it's in here somewhere, general, where is it? Tools, options. Well, we have somewhere in the dialog a place to edit your various settings for the XML type. I'll have to come back to figure that out. But there's some settings, we might have been moved recently, that'll actually allow you to set, how you want your tabs and so forth. Where do you want your formatting? A lot of it's customizable. You'll see there's a whole toolbar here, XML editor.
Yep.
And I can remove that, and you can I just wanted you to see the toolbar on the up there. This whole toolbar is for the XML editor.
Okay.
And let me take you to a tour of a couple of more demos that show off some of those features. If I go over to this employee one here, let me actually open this up. Okay. And it's a real simple XML file, right? I mean, this is the whole thing. It's just your standard employee, and then you got name, address. One of the interesting things is it's declaring a XML namespace, and it's pointing to a certain schema. If we come over here to the property sheet,
Yep.
notice we're pointing to the schema. You can do it inline in the document if you want. There's a lot of applications that do that. Here, I'm separating the schema because you could either have it embedded in the XML and it always validates, or you could have it separated and you write code after you parse the document, like in code, that you can validate it later. So watch, I'm going to click that little ellipsis button, and it brings up this little schema dialog. And this will tell you the schemas you have on your machine, and then you can basically register them, and you can even say add and then copy them to a folder. And we have one folder that's made for like your schema library.
Now, how many of the schemas came with Whitby? Or is that most?
I don't know the exact number, and we're working on which ones we add. You'll see in some of the demos like core things like XSLT and a lot of things in Visual Studio. A good example is the ASP.NET team provided us with a web config schema. Whereas before, and I'll show it later, when you're editing web config files, before it was like if you made an error, you made an error. Now we have a schema fully validates. So a lot of XML files that ship with Visual Studio and some other common ones are included in this catalog. Of course, you can go down online and basically pull down any XSD or create your own and throw it in that folder. And what happens is you get something like this, XML namespace equals, and you have a nice little pick list of whatever's in there. See, there's some of the ones that we have, SOAP, WSDL, right? Anybody that's working with web services, Indigo, Avalon, XAML, there's I don't know if we'll include that one, but I have a sample of that.
Right.
So, I mean, there'll be tons, whatever you want. Could be chemical markup language, right? It's something in the industry.
Now, what is a schema? If somebody's just getting into
You're going to see an example in a second, because let me show you these errors here. Like if I come down and I'm going to remove the city here. There's a little R there. I remove the city, and notice it added a warning. Okay, it added a new warning, and it says the city element is invalid. Okay, and it says the actual length is less than the min length. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this city, and I'm going to right-click and say go to definition.
Yep.
It's going to automatically open up the XSD schema file, which is an XML file that is basically data. It's the metadata behind the data types and all that. I mean, I don't have time to go into defining an XSD, but there used to be DTDs, which were document type definitions, that define basic rules of the document,
Yep.
and that's the data. And so the XSD file is a XML document with all the rules and constraints. You know, like you're allowed to have this tag, this element has to be within this one, this has to have a certain value. It's the rules.
Yeah.
Like in a database where you have business rules validated, it's somewhat, and it's a descriptive language. So let me go back and do that again because I wanted to follow a series of steps. If I say go to definition, and it actually shows you city of residence. One of the things I missed to show you is if I hover over it, it'll actually pull IntelliSense and show you the tooltip as I hover over things.
Yep.
That's all new. And so if I go back to that document, and now I select the type city, and I right-click and say go to this definition, it goes within the same document, and it shows you the rules. Notice it says min length 2 to 50.
Yep.
Well, 1 to 50. I can change that to 2 to 50, but if I just come over here and say a letter, any letter, it gets rid of the error because it's now valid within the rules. So this document essentially here is created that simply validate this whole employee file. Now let's suppose we didn't have one of these. There's tools to create this. We have a basic XSD editor in Visual Studio 2005. It's very similar to the one in Visual Studio 2003. And what we have is a way now new to infer a schema. What does that mean, infer? That's not an everyday word. So if I don't have a schema, I can actually hit this Create Schema button.
Where's that? Let me see.
It's right at the top of the toolbar.
Got it.
And I'll just do a John Madden, boom. And it's going to automatically infer, based on your attributes and elements and the relations to them, it's going to create a schema for you automatically. It doesn't have specific rules. It wouldn't know that you have a certain length or a certain value and so forth. But if it sees a true or a false, it'll infer Boolean rather than character. And then when you're typing, so you get IntelliSense. Let's go back to here. And if I say something like, I have an employee, so I'll create a new one. And if I jump down, see where it says employee?
Yep.
And if I close that one, hit enter, and now notice it says, well, name is in there, and you got to have a name. And so this is required. Name is required, street isn't, right? So then you put in name, or if I come up to employee, you can say, what's the title, right? Channel 9 guy, right? And notice I didn't end the tag there, so I got to get rid of that error. But you get the idea here. See, and then there's still errors within your required attribute ID is missing. See how much more helpful this whole thing is when you have the IntelliSense? If I say, okay, now I need an ID, if I say equals test.
It's going to save hours.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what type it is. Even the test attribute invalid according to the type string. See, equals. So you'll see examples later of all this IntelliSense stuff. But let me actually close this one. And I'm going to go into another sample. And we call this one, it's an old one. It goes back to like 96 or something. And definitely Tim Bray would be familiar with this document. It's called Hamlet XML. It's a pretty large file. I mean, in the sense of like 300 and some K, about 8,000 lines, right? I mean, there's certainly bigger ones, but because we're using the system.xml framework class, and we're using managed code to do all this, it's super fast to add stuff. So what we do is this one is using an old DTD. I mean, we still support full DTD. And if we go in, I think I have that file up there. Or I can just say, right-click and go to definition, and it opens up that DTD, and we do full color coding and IntelliSense on DTDs. Cool. But what's important here is that you have IntelliSense like, oh, here's a speech, and if I come down here, notice it has, your speech attribute, and then you can just fill it in, put in some value. But it's fully validating against this.
Yep.
And notice we've got the outlining. That was a big request.
Ooh, show me that again.
So what you have is, notice you have all of these elements. Like here's a big act. It's pretty large. If I collapse it, it's like in Internet Explorer, where if you're viewing a document, you've got the outlining. What we do is we take the new Visual Studio feature with the ellipsis, and look, there's even a tooltip of what's under there collapsed.
Wow.
Yeah, no. And then you can just double click here and expand it out. Neat, huh? But you get this with all the .NET languages now in Visual Studio 2005. So there's so many cool things. In fact, just to give you a tip of another cool editor feature, let me close this one out. I'm going to jump right back to the employee one.
Okay.
And there's something called code snippets. Have you heard of this so far?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But show it off again, because
So what we have is this. Remember the schema had a certain definition of employee. So what happens is, you come down here and you say, oh, I want employee. But now the magic button is tab. Watch when I hit tab. It's automatically going to go out to the schema, pull in the required information for that, and then automatically build a template.
That's cool. That was just off the tab. Show me that again.
Yeah, exactly. So now we go open bracket, right? And then we say we want the employee.
Right.
And now I'm just going to hit the tab.
Okay.
And it's automatically going to say, oh, go out for the employee, the definition of the employee element and all within it.
Yep.
And then build up based on the definition in there. Again, this could be something like...
Now, where are these snippets stored when people see Visual Studio?
They're XML files that are in certain folders. Developers will end up discovering where these things are.
Okay.
And you can go edit them. And what's nice is all the code snippet definition is in XML format, just like a lot of things. So now is a good time to actually show you how that might work. I'm going to go into this class file. It's a C# snippet, right?
Yep.
This is the whole program. It's a little class that's got some C# code. And I don't really care to show you what's in the code yet. It's for a later demo. But now I'm going to go into this code snippet, if I can find that, for each snippet. All right. So somewhere, I put it in my project, but somewhere on my hard drive is this for each snippet, and it's an XML file, right?
Yep.
I believe this one is actually, of course, it's part of the C# language. It's included. It's included in this folder when you get Visual Studio 2005. And it's like an IntelliSense enhancement feature, and it defines how you want to auto-expand on for each. The best way to show you is to go in here, and I'll say for each, and I'll hit tab. Sound familiar? It's just like I talked about. And then, oops, boom, it automatically creates this block of code structure. Doesn't matter if you're in VB and you're not familiar with the language, you're getting used to it, or you just forgot, or you just want to save on typing.
Right.
And then you can come in here and then fill in, what's the object name, whatever.
Okay, there. So the green parts are user
Fill in the blank. It's a helper to say that this is almost like a virtual text box in a way, right?
God, this is helpful.
Well, what's really interesting is if you come back in here, see the definition? See where it has like a default tooltip? Well, I hover over these things and it gives you a tooltip of what these are.
Right.
See, this is all new. But what I could do is come in here and say, you know what?
This wasn't working in Beta 1, was it?
No, I don't believe so. In fact, the whole XML Tools you're seeing here wasn't in Beta 1. Everything you see here is in Beta 1. And I should point out before we forget is the Express SKUs, these really lower down versions that are really inexpensive. The XML editor, everything you see in the XML editor, it's included in all those.
All of them?
All of them.
Including
ASP.NET, J#, yeah. Well, the SQL Express is not Visual Studio, so
right.
But everything but the Express SKU, other than the SKU stand, is basically part number.
Right.
But it's the Express version. Yeah, it's basically there, so you can just grab a version of VB Express and then go use all these things.
For the price
when we get to XSLT later.
Now, how much are the Express SKUs?
I thought they were $49, but don't quote me on this.
So a few 6-packs of beer.
And there'll be ways to get it easier. Then there's the XSLT stuff I'll show in a little bit, and that's for professional level and above because it's really more of a professional level feature.
Right.
So let's go back to this where I changed the tooltip.
Let me just set my tripod down here. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
Try not to make everybody sick. Cool.
So I changed the tooltip, and I scroll down here, and notice there's a block of XML CData, which is just like a blob of text.
Right.
And of course, CDatas can have XML or HTML in them, so you could be outputting like a block of XML or HTML. But I'm going to break the code in a sense, but I want to show the flexibility. I'm going to put an X in front of the open paren.
Okay.
I'll hit Control S to save the document, and I'll jump back into this class in C#. I'll say for each, and I'll hit Tab, and notice my tooltip for object is now capital, and I put the X there.
Yep.
So you can create your own code snippets. You can either enhance the ones that are there, or more likely build your own system. If you create your own classes for your own framework or your application development,
Yep.
then you can create your own code snippets with the XML editor or other tools.
Oh, that's killer.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to show you is two things: the code snippet support in XML editor, and how you can edit code snippets with the XML editor. So there's so many things. I'm not going to save the. Well, actually, what I'll do is I'm going to put that back so I don't forget it.
Okay.
And I'll close this out, save, and I'll close this one out. Okay, let's see what we want to show next. So we got that. So let's jump right into the XSLT stuff. Oh, before I do that, actually, let me show you different types because I was already mentioning these. Web config. Pretend I'm building an ASP.NET application. You pretty much have a web config file in every project. So when you open this thing, notice we've got the XML namespace, which is already included, pointing to it. And what this gives you is IntelliSense and automatic validation and everything to do with this kind of a document. This way, as developers go in and make changes to these things, this type of document, they will know if they're making any core errors or not. That doesn't mean, of course, their app will work perfect. But here's a great example: debug true or false. What if I put an X there? Okay, it gives you a warning. Why? Because when I come over here and say equals, it's got an enum list automatically, true, false, because it's Boolean, right? So there's all kinds of things. Hit space there and it tells you what kind of custom error settings there are. This is a big deal because you went from just almost using Notepad with color to having a document that's smart about every aspect. You don't want to hit save until there's no errors or warnings down there, essentially. Unless you really know what you're doing for some odd reason. But if there's errors, it might not even parse the XML, and then the app wouldn't run.
Oh, if you're Tim Bray, you can...
Even he can't validate the core rules to get a parser to run. So then we close this one out.
Or John Paoli. Jim works at Sun, for those people. Those two guys are the co-inventors.
And I know them both. So now here's one other one, window.xaml. I don't have like Avalon loaded on the machine, but you've certainly heard of this XAML, X-A-M-L. It's the XML under the hood for things like Avalon. And again, what we have is a full schema. And you can have multiple schemas pointing to it. So notice there's one schema here for Avalon and one for XAML. And that means when you come in here and do things like window dot or whatever, see if I say window colon, it goes to a whole other namespace and a whole other layer of IntelliSense.
Yeah.
So you have multiple documents in there. So I don't have a demo for this. I just wanted to show that any type of XML, whether it's a Microsoft file type or other, works great in here. So now let's open an XSL file, XSLT, same thing. This is for transformation. You load in an XML document type, you load in an XSL document, and you transform, and the XSL is like a language, for those that don't have a familiarity. And it's XML, but then there's a processor that essentially reads this language. It's very runtime-oriented, dynamic, and it goes through, and it walks through the document, and it'll build either another XML file or maybe HTML or some other output type. And a common thing is one XML type to another, like BizTalk server uses it. I want to go from a purchase order type A to purchase order type B, or a cost list to a price list, filtering out the data, having different elements. A lot of people use it to go from XML to HTML. And so what I have here is this little tiny document. It's like a program. See here, it's not that large of a file. And take a look here. What we've got is an input document, and it says sample.xml. I better open that so you know what I'm looking at. It's one of these typical little documents. It's just got things like customer order, price. It doesn't look that fancy in raw XML, but it's easy to read. Now we go back to the style sheet, and it's got this little language. And what we did is for the XSLT editor, what we can do is actually have color coding that's even smart on XSLT. So it goes even a little beyond just core XML editing. And when you say XSLT, you get the full language in XSLT right there. And it's all using the system.xml framework classes. So now what I can do is come up to this little toolbar up here and say show XSLT output. All right? And it automatically transforms it and displays it in a little form hosting Internet Explorer as a viewer.
Wow.
Exactly, wow. So now let me close the XML source, and I'm going to go up here, and there's a nice little feature like a split screen thing, like this.
Show me that menu again.
I think there you go back here, and you can just say, I'll I'll just close this one out here first.
Okay.
This is like the steps. I'd come over here and I would say show XSLT, and it automatically
Right.
outputs it to another window. I go on to either tab, I right click, and you can either say view horizontal or view vertical.
Oh, that's cool.
Horizontal, split above and below,
Okay.
and then you can swap the order and so forth. It's just a common thing. This is in the current version of Visual Studio 2003 as well. All right, but then you can come in here and see where it says background color equals maroon.
Yep.
And I can just change that to blue, right?
Yep.
And I come up show output, and boom,
Boom.
there it is. See?
Do that again. Change it back to maroon.
Like that.
Yeah.
I move the mouse and I hit show output, and boom, that's it.
Wow.
This is a really slick way of just previewing. Okay,
Yep.
You want to up the wow factor. The wow factor that everybody that uses XSLT loves and needs is full debugging with breakpoints. And one of the things we do, well, actually, if we hit F5, what we would do is actually try to run your default program in your project, so you don't debug that way with XSLT. What we do is we added a new button called Debug XSLT. And you hit this button,
Okay.
and it will launch the full Visual Studio 2005 debugger, and you've got total integration of the locals window. You can step through, like hit F5 and step through, and even builds the document. So if you're sitting there coding in your XSLT language, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, you have a full debugger here to step through and watch the output.
Oh,
'Cause
that's
maybe it's
amazing.
not formatting the way you want, you have a typo or an error, or you just want to improve the, because so
Oh man.
it's got full support like that.
Yeah. I can see why
You know
people
what?
would be thrilled about that.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And so I'll say stop debugging, build errors, no, and I'll say close it out. Now let me take you to another step here about the debugging. And I'm going to go back into that little program I showed you with the code snippets,
Yep.
just by coincidence.
Class CS.
Yeah, exactly. And look at the code, okay, down here. See where it says transform. This is some just basic code that you could do in any language where it loads the system.xml. See, system.xml, system.xlt. It loads the XML document, the sample, and it loads the XSLT, and then it runs a line of code called transform.
Yep.
See here? And that's all it's going to do. And I could have a breakpoint here if I wanted, but if it's going to go in and transform the XSLT, now this one I will hit F5. Okay, and what it's going to do is actually, I was in a C# program, right?
Yep.
And now I've actually put a breakpoint right here on the XSLT. What happens in Visual Studio 2005 is anything you do with XSLT now, the debugger, it will compile it into IL. It'll compile XSLT like a .NET language.
Whoa.
And it runs many times faster. And you can do that from debugging, and you can do that in code. There's now like this, method that allows you to compile. So if you're doing something on a server or whatever, and you're doing it on a routine basis, you just compile your XSLT into a little component, and then you could reuse it, and it's much, much faster. And we do that right here, and it treats it like a whole .NET language. So take a look at debug, and let's look at Windows, and we look at the call stack, right? Now look here, it's actually debugging, and I can switch back and forth between the C# debugging code and the XSLT debugging code.
Wow.
And you could be stepping through,
And I
going back and forth.
That wasn't in 2003.
Oh, there was
This
no debugging of XSLT in Visual Studio 2003. In 2003, you can debug between languages, but of course there's lots of improvements with the debugger Visual Studio 2005. And what we did is simply integrate XSLT as a full debugging language here. Notice you got that quick console output. You've got watch window stuff, so you can drill in and see variables that are happening in memory at once. So it's fully loaded. I hope that gives you a good example without going into tons of depth just on the debugging.
No,
what I did just
absolutely.
before you came over for a goof is I went up to my blog and I just saved the RSS type. I just want to show you a basic example of a more of a scenario. Now here's my RSS. I copied it right from MSDN, blogs.msdn.com/Levy, and notice when it generates without carriage return line feeds, right? So it doesn't really matter because it's all the XML is right in here. It's fine, and I'm not going to make any changes to the XML. And there's things you can do to auto format and so forth. But what I'm going to do is actually open up this thing in style sheets called RSS XML, and just for fun, I applied my input to be that same XML file, right?
Okay.
And actually, I must be debugging here. Let me see something. Stop debugging. That's why. Okay. There was a couple of menu items that weren't running, and
So it asked you line
yeah.
ending.
Well, yeah. So I just need to make sure it ended that. Okay. So back in the see now there's like a formatting. So if I say format the whole document, one button, boom, it automatically formats. And in your options dialog, you can set, the indentation levels and all these other things to personalize, just like the editor in general. So I go back here, and now what happens when I say show XSLT output? This is a tiny little XSLT file, and it just renders my blog in another way, right?
Wow.
And then I go back to the RSS file, and if I say, you know what, I want my title to be H3 instead of H1. Like if you look back.
So we're going to see a ton of news aggregators come out, huh?
Well, the thing is, if someone wants to take RSS and use it for something other than, like on the server, and you want to publish a page, something static,
Yep.
for example, you could do that here. You could be using multiple RSS files, combine them programmatically into one, and then essentially, build a whole personalized news page, right?
Wow.
So if I go back into the RSS, so I changed the output. See, that's like an H1 in
Yep.
HTML. So I just change it to H3, and I'll go ahead and put in HR. That's a line, essentially. And
Yep.
I just hit view again, and now I've got the line and the smaller text. You see how easy it is? And of course, I could debug it, and I can basically change the RSS.
Hey, dude. Hey, come on in.
All right, you guys doing something for Channel 9?
Yeah.
Oh,
The
cool.
XML.
Who are you now?
Hi.
You've been on Channel 9
I've been on it a few times. I'm
Yeah.
Alan Greiver. I'm group manager of VS Data.
Yeah.
And work with
You're the
Ken
boss,
all the time.
right?
Our group basically sponsors the XML tools from the web data team, the XML web data team.
Right.
Yeah. And it is an awesome piece of tools. I'm really proud of this.
What do you think of it so far?
I'm blown away, man.
Yeah, I'll leave you guys.
I'm not even an
alone to
XML
continue.
programmer, and I'm blown away.
Take care, man.
Well, okay. You
What I'm
can jump into our videos anytime. Yeah.
Thanks.
What I'm hoping for is that I'm showing you scenarios of why the tools are useful, and not just like cool things that a developer would go off and do with XML.
No, this is.
Because
I could see a lot of
see
uses.
you can see, and again, there's a lot of people that use XML some of the time. There's a few out there that are XML gurus. They work with it all the time. That's what they live and breathe it. But a huge percentage of people that are developers use XML sometimes, and when they get into that situation, they need these kind of tools. Now that they're basically built into Visual Studio, it's really powerful because you can see more and more types, like the code snippets, like XAML, like all these other things. They're all built based on XML, and so you'll end up needing the tools even more.
Yep.
So I think that just about covers the demos that I have. Can you think of any other questions?
Oh, jeez.
There are more things overall in the tool set, and you'll be seeing some
Could you
of that.
build a validator for RSS
Oh, here, there is something else that I want to show
Okay.
you. Yeah. I tried not to use a cheat sheet on the demos so that I'd look down the list, but there was one important thing,
All right.
and there's two reasons I'm going to show you this. One is because it's a feature for developers in Visual Studio, and it's going to signal the extensibility of what we have in the XML tools and what you could do with it.
Okay.
So I'm going to load in this thing called resx. People in Visual Studio are kind of familiar with this resource file called resx.
Right.
Now, in Visual Studio 2003, when you open one of these, it's just an XML file. But this was one of those things where people like yourself who don't necessarily want to edit raw XML on a regular basis,
Yeah.
you want to edit like a dialogue. Why do you care that there's XML under the hood? It's great to use XML, but it's also great to abstract it and hide it, to make things simpler, even for developers. So watch when we double-click on this resource file. The Visual Basic team created this, and this applies to all of Visual Studio. It doesn't matter if you're in C++ or VB or whatever. And it's a tool that's basically written in VB.NET, and it's essentially a dialog with a grid that reads in the XML, turns it into ADO.NET, and binds it to a grid and allows you to make changes. So if I come over here and I say text editor and I say XML editor, right?
Yep.
And now I'm going to close this file. Okay, and there's that, right? And if I open it back up, it's there. And I changed XML. And how do you see this is you go open with, and you say open with the XML editor.
Yep.
and it will open side by side the file. And if I, in fact, let's use my little outlining here, right? And I'll condense this stuff so that I can scroll down easily. And somewhere along the way, I typed it in. There's the XML, and I can say, you know, I can put in VS 2005 XML editor, right?
Yep.
And I can save it and I'd be done. But notice I've got both windows open. And what I can actually do is I can do my little split screen like I did with you before.
Yep.
And I can just scroll down here and look, there it is. It changed. And if I want, you know what, I better expand that out like that. And if I just tab back here, both documents are open and it just does a refresh. It's hard to, there it is, see? So you can edit the raw XML and
That's
use this
awesome.
tool simultaneously, like a two-way tool.
Now, could you, if you had big screens, could you put a
Oh
third
yeah,
view?
yeah. I'm in this mode of 1024 768. It's a little low, you know, for the demos for the output.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can split screen it and move it around. You basically see them change by. I don't think developers will be doing this side by side thing all the time, but it's great to be able to see what's happening, especially if like you're developing something and you need to understand what's going on under the hood. The important thing is this is just a little tool written in VB.
Right.
And now think of it. Someone create a tool like this for RSS. Right? If somebody's opening RSS files and they're making changes and doing things, why don't they create kind of a little add-in? So we are working on an architecture where you can say, oh, I want to open your own custom designer.
Right.
And it's really just a visual editor on top of the XML, and then you'd be able to open the two types. And that could work for all kinds of things, you know, beyond RSS. It could be even like a web config, or, you know, the web services team is interested in one for WSDL.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean you want to make changes or even view what's in the WSDL. Wouldn't it be nice to have a dialogue that essentially, so whether that team does it at Microsoft or we work with the community to have one built and put online and then everybody uses.
Right.
So I can see a community of people building these little
How hard would
add-ons.
it be to build a system that would take an RSS2 file and spit it out as an Atom file, or take an Atom file and spit it out as an RSS2 file?
I haven't tried that, but it's doable. You know, basically a converter.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing, I haven't played with that ability, but I'm sure there's stuff out there that does this already.
Right.
You know, I think what's happening on sites is somebody writes two different programs. One outputs RSS and one outputs. Not often are you trying to convert an existing one back to another one, because usually they're just already outputting both.
All right.
But if I wanted to, I could write something to convert your RSS to Atom, and then that would, you know.
Also, if I wanted to look at somebody's RSS2 file and validate it, make sure it's an approved RSS2 file, Visual Studio doesn't come with a validator built in, does it?
The schema, no. What we are avoiding is we are including some W3C schemas like XLT and all that, but we don't want to go out there and pull all this stuff off the web and then include it.
Yep.
So we let you go online, pull down the like RSS 2.0 schema. There's an XSD out there that fully defines it. You put it in your file, and then you either reference it in your document or down in the properties page,
Okay.
and then you get the full IntelliSense with all the everything
that's
that's in there.
nice.
And if it's got documentation, you get it in the tooltips and all
Okay.
that, and the error messages.
Okay.
See?
So you can open up people's RSS2 files using a predefined schema and tell whether it's going to validate or not.
Absolutely.
Ah.
Exactly. Before you submit it or before you run your program
That's
or whatever.
Really, that's really cool
Yeah.
because that way that'll really help you build an aggregator quickly.
Right. And keep in mind that all these tools here are neutral to whatever language you're dealing with. You
Yeah.
can be doing any .NET language. You can even be using something like Visual Fox Pro, and it's not inside Visual Studio, but yet if you're a developer, you're using both tools side by side,
Right.
and you know there's a lot of scenarios where that's needed.
Yeah.
And
Well, there's
no matter which version.
I noticed you have a little iPod over here somewhere.
yeah, I do.
I thought we're not.
It took
Did you
to
get the
my
memo? We're not allowed to use those in
It
Microsoft
took to
anymore?
my Bose stick. I have several. I have one at home too.
But are you using any of the podcasting software on that?
I'm not in a mode where I'm listing the stuff more than going online and clicking on a file.
Because that's what I'm using mine for, is using an RSS aggregator that pulls down MP3 files
Right.
and puts them on the iPod or puts them on
Sure.
the iRiver or whatever.
Sure.
Sorry, my
All that stuff under the hood is using XML, and developers that build this stuff, yeah, there's more and more tools building on top of XML, but as we move
Well,
forward,
that's what I'm getting to, is that a developer can now build an iPod or kind of application very quickly.
I think what we're going to see, and what I'd like to see, is more developers using RSS in their application.
Yeah.
See, to me, RSS it's a killer XML document type, but it's mostly killer when people apply it properly, like for blogs and news. That's the big thing now. But when you have a new component, let's say you're building an app and you create a new update, right? Yeah. Why can't you have it publish an XML type that's RSS, and you write a separate program that reads it, and it might pull out and say, oh, by the way, the app you're running, it has another version, or you do it automatically behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And they're just using RSS as a natural way in their app, as a way of, this is not a corporate Microsoft message saying go use RSS everywhere.
Yeah.
But I think
it's getting to be
more and more declaring things in XML, because if you are using multiple platforms too, that's when they all talk to each other. Yeah. And that's important. Interoperability is huge, whether to Microsoft products, non-Microsoft products, other platforms. So we're definitely seeing, it doesn't mean use XML every single place. A lot of times there might be some performance issues and other, but this is for tools that are people that are using XML or considering it in certain places to say, hey, your productivity is going to go way up with these tools.
Absolutely.
So
that's cool stuff.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see the apps that people create with it.
I'm looking forward to people. Yeah, most people haven't used any of this because it wasn't in beta 1. Nope. So basically, when you get beta 2 and you're curious to go play with something, go play with some of this, and you'll end up using it daily, even if you're not deploying your app. You can just have this on your machine and use it, and you probably will say to yourself, I can't live without it after you've used it for a while.
And this comes with Express SKUs.
That's right. You get any Express SKU, and you won't get the XSLT editor debugger.
Yeah.
And there was, maybe you don't get the create schema inference, but all of the editing, apply any schema you want, all that, it's all built in, all Express SKUs.
Wow.
All Express versions.
We're going to see some really cool RSS and XML.
Well, I'm hoping to see people blog and chat or developers talk about it, and more demos at conferences about it, and so forth.
Yep. Anything else you want to
No, that's about it.
Very cool. Very cool stuff. Thanks.
Yeah.